just take it in the arm and you'll be set free. I want you to know you shouldn't take them in the arm. They're not safe, particularly the ones for the pandemic virus. People are dying with these. You take one of these in the arm and you're unlucky to have a cardiac arrest or a blood clot. Your life and liberty have been threatened, in some cases completely taken away from you with no recourse.
What is their truest motivation here that would make them roll out these things that steal our liberty and steal our freedom?
In 2021, it was like a switch went off, and then I went from being an eminent scientist, professor of medicine, published in New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet, all the top journals, to being a conspiracy theorist pushing unproven medicines. The bad guys had to suppress me and anybody in my circle because COVID-19 is the opportunity to reset a new world order. This is essentially what happened in Nazi Germany. And their classic propaganda terms and tools, there's 6 of them that are being used today in today's pandemic. The masks began to symbolize something, and that was compliance. I think it became a representative of fear, of personal fearfulness.
This is the war on the mind, and this is why this conversation is so life-changing, because it doesn't have to be a war. We can just recognize that we don't need to participate in the war. Hey, it's Josh. Before we get into this episode, I have a small yet powerful favor to ask of you. The community has been growing by thousands lately, and the bigger the tribe, the bigger names of world-class guests we can have on this podcast that I can bring to you from my heart, from my curiosity, so you can have more wellness and wisdom in your life. Would you please be so kind as to hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast? It'll allow us to rise naturally in the algorithms based on your 2-second act of generosity by you just tapping that little subscribe button wherever you're viewing or hearing this episode. Thank you so much. It means the world to me and our entire team here at Wellness and Wisdom. Now enjoy the podcast. I find that we're in a theater, Dr. McCullough. We're in a freaking theater right now. Do you feel like you're playing the role of a healer and a doctor and a Samaritan? You're the most published and spoken about author and doctor in the fields of cardiology and the liver too, right?
No, I study heart and kidney interactions, but when I looked at what was going down, I told myself, listen, if I can't play a positive role here, no one can. People have asked me, is it worth it? I said, if I have helped one person, it was worth it. That's the business that I'm in. The protocols I've developed and published, I'm one of the most published people in the entire field of the pandemic. These publications and the promulgation of these methods, both in managing the acute infection and now managing the consequences of the mass administration campaign, have been attributed to saving tens of millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations worldwide. So my career, when this whole thing rolled out, entered a far more important and meaningful phase than it had previously. Previously, I was the most published person in the field of heart and kidney interactions. I lectured all over the world. I've lectured at the New York Academy of Sciences, European Medicine Agency. I presented at the U.S. FDA Congressional Oversight Panel in 2007. I was on C-SPAN for hours. I was the endowed lecturer at Harvard University School of Medicine in 2019 in 2 divisions, cardiology and nephrology. And my Wikipedia page was scintillating up until the summer of 2021. That's very interesting. So it was actually through the first year and a half of the crisis, it was fine. And in 2021, it was like a switch went off. And then I went from being an eminent scientist, professor of medicine, published in New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet, all the top journals, to being a conspiracy theorist pushing unproven medicines.
Kind of makes you feel like you're in a theater.
How can that happen?
Yeah.
Who is controlling Wikipedia? When I looked into it, there were hundreds of Wikipedia contributors on my page suddenly. There was somebody out of Illinois called the Altman. We don't even know who these people are. Just writing, spewing all kinds of negativity on my Wikipedia page. I saw things in my career that had never happened before in my life. I was the editor of 2 major journals for decades, Cardiorenal Medicine and Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. We have a process where a manuscript is submitted. It's assigned to an editor, associate editor, that handles the manuscript, and then to reviewers, 2 or more reviewers. There is a peer-reviewed process, and the reviewers are asked, please give constructive comments and tell us in the end either accept with minor revisions, major revisions, or reject. And that's how the process goes forever and ever and ever. And that's how papers are peer-reviewed. And papers are published. Not everyone likes the conclusions or disagrees. Then we have letters to the editor, and there's a scholarly discourse of letters to the editor and response. That's how it works. What I saw in the pandemic for the first time in my career, manuscript would be submitted. It would go through this peer-reviewed process, and it would culminate in publication. A publication involves a contract, a copyright agreement, a fee. It's usually substantial. We pay out of our pocket, $3,000 to $6,000 per manuscript.
Who are you paying the fee to?
The publisher. I have over 700 listed in the National Library of Medicine. And I have another 300 or so that's not listed in the National Library. This is a very expensive undertaking, okay? There are extra charges for color figures. Then there's indexing in the National Library of Medicine, which is the finale. That's actually now part of permanent medical history. After all of this, if we had a paper that is exploring, suggesting, reviewing a multi-drug treatment protocol to help people avoid hospitalization and death, it would get out there for a month or 2 and then all of a sudden retracted. The journal would say, sorry, we're pulling this down. And now there are criteria by which a journal can pull a paper down. If there's fraud, if the authors requested it be pulled down, there was some mistake made in the paper. But there are scientific criteria. None of the criteria are fulfilled. We'd say, well, why are you pulling this down? No reason. Or administrative, something that's very nebulous. And when this happened to me at first in 2020 on an early treatment paper, I said, wait a minute, something is wrong. And then it happened paper after paper. Any type of approach that could help save lives was crushed. And then later on, when the mass administration campaign occurred and everyone was asked to take a novel genetic biotechnological product in their arm in 2021, any manuscript that questioned this, questioned safety, questioned efficacy, was crushed. And to this day, you pick up any of the major journals, let's say New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, Annals of Internal Medicine, 100% of the papers on these novel products, the genetic coding for part of the protein of the virus, 100% of the papers say they're safe and effective. There's not a single dissenting voice. Now you take any other product. Let's take statins that lower cholesterol levels. Oh, there'll be papers saying statins are safe and effective. There's other papers saying, wait a minute, there's side effects here to statins. Let's take back surgery. Oh, back surgery helps people improve their back pain. Oh no, back surgery has complications. There's always a pro and a con. There's always a balance in the field of science and medicine. Always. But not now. Not now because of this bias. So the bias is at the level of the editorial board. It's at the level of the reviewers. It's at the level of the institutions that the reviewers are employed at. And then if it actually gets through all of that, it's even at the level of the publisher. And there has been some investigative journalism suggesting that there are outside forces that are surveilling the medical literature, contacting publishers and saying, this one's getting too much attention, you've got to take it down.
Now, who do you believe they are, these outside sources?
In my book, Courage to Face Preventing Hospitalizations and Deaths While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex, the only book in this genre that was banned temporarily by Amazon. Banned. Like a modern day book burning. I believe it was banned because we identified the exact set of perpetrators. The perpetrators that we define in this biopharmaceutical complex include the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, Rockefeller Foundation, CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, Gavi, Global Alliance, all the regulatory agencies, the MHRA in the UK, the NHS, the CDC, NIH, and FDA in the United States, UNAID, which is an important liaison group from the government to the complex, TGA in Australia, SAFRA in South Africa. You can actually find the tentacles of this organization memorialized in a whole series of agreements, working relationships, investments. They meet every year in Davos, Switzerland. So the World Economic Forum is a clear administrative head. The World Health Organization, which has 8,000 employees. I mean, this is a behemoth, is a central coordination of the center. Now, the companies, the biotech companies and the pharmaceutical companies, they're not in the center of the complex. They're suppliers. And the suppliers reap massive benefits when a global crisis can be declared and then response measures are taken. This is very important. They can be personal protective equipment. If you're in that business of making gowns and gloves and shields, it's game on. It can be hand sanitizers, in vitro diagnostics like PCR and antigen testing, and clearly novel therapeutics, oral, intravenous, monoclonal antibodies. And then really the holy grail of pandemic response is to provide sets of inoculations that one would have to take based on faith. This is very important. If one is sick with a medical problem and they get a diagnosis and they get a drug, we can actually study whether or not the drug works. But if one is given a product and saying, this is going to prevent you from getting the disease, it's taken on faith for the following reasons. Because you may or may not come in contact with that infectious disease. So if you took it in the arm and you never got sufficiently in contact with the illness, the product could have provided no protection. If you've already had the illness, like a widely prevalent respiratory illness, you would have natural protection through cellular and antibody-based mechanisms, and that would protect you. The product in the arm may not do anything at all. The product in the arm may wear off in a matter of months. So when you actually do get exposed later on, you're not provided any protection. And if you do get this respiratory illness, unless you're so moved to get a test and try to make a diagnosis, it could be missed anyway. You could say, well, I just had a cold, of which we get about 4 colds a year. So when we talk about efficacy of these products, of which, there was a simultaneous worldwide mass administration campaign of them, pushed, a whole array of these. The efficacy was always theoretical because of all these factors. In fact, two more additional important factors. The virus could mutate and become very mild, so it would have nothing to do with what was taken in the arm. That, in fact, happened. And then on top of that, early treatment protocols, like McCullough protocol, could be used and widely promulgated. And so the therapeutics used when someone gets sick, that's really the game changer, not what somebody took in the arm 2 years ago. So because of all those factors, efficacy is always theoretical. However, the harms are real. So if someone took one of these and they developed heart inflammation and had a cardiac arrest, which is well described in the peer-reviewed literature, well described in all the safety databases, that's real. It's not theoretical. Someone takes it in the arm and they get a giant blood clot and it shoots to the lungs. That's real. So one of the key points to be made here is the harms based on crude data. We don't even need relative analytics, just the crude data of counting the number of people harmed. That is real. The population benefit was and will always be theoretical.
Yeah, what's so challenging, I'm sure, as a physician is being so rooted in science and then having the very science that you're rooted in be morphed and amalgamated by people that have these financial interests that really, as I've heard you describe before, and we've covered this concept with many people on the show, even people that do therapy for a living, psychotherapists, this concept of mass psychosis. It's like, how do you hide data? How do you hide truth that you're so rooted in? One of the most published and spoken people in this topic. And how do you control people to believe something where there's only a myopic path? It's through this form of psychosis. There's no way to get around it unless there's only one story that's believed and that God of science is worshipped. There's got to be other paths. Like you said, with every other condition, there's always pros and cons. Yet with this one you're describing, there's no cons. At least that's what the formative narrative, the normie narrative was sharing. Was that challenging for you when it first came on scene, 2020, 2021? It had to have just hit you in the heart because by then you'd already had decades in medicine. So you had to have had a real gut check moment as a physician.
I knew something was wrong because I actually had the illness myself in October of 2020 before they came out. And, I got sick. My wife got sick. It was like a cold. It probably was a little bit rougher for me than a cold. I had some pulmonary involvement. But I was, I was out exercising and, as long as there's no fever, by the way, medically, it's fine to exercise even if you have congestion. So I was out exercising. It was a sunny day in Dallas. Things were relatively closed. So, it's good to get outside, get some fresh air. And I made a YouTube video. And I announced, who I previously had never made a YouTube video. I'd never been on social media. My daughter encouraged me to do it. And I made a YouTube video and I announced who I am. I say, hey, listen, I've got the illness. I'm out exercising. I'm on a form of a multi-drug protocol, which I was. That was an FDA-approved protocol that was under an institutional review board. I mean, I was doing this by the books. And I said, listen, I think together with early treatment, we can beat this. And the YouTube video went out. It went viral. And then within a day or two, removed for violating the community rules. And I said, what community rules do we have that would remove a very positive message like this, that there are protocols being developed and that I was encouraging people to get into protocols, scientific protocols, which is the right thing to do so we can study this. And as I started to formulate what was going on, I believed that it couldn't just all be finances because people have a conscience. And if it was all finances, the million doctors that we have in the United States, there would start to be chatter. And we always see chatter on text messages and what have you. And I was working at a big medical center at the time, professor of medicine. I was, supervising many doctors. I was, in the coffee room and we would have heard chatter like, geez, we're all getting such, huge bonuses. We're doing something wrong with this, but we have to go along with it to line our pocketbooks. No one was saying that. In fact, there really wasn't any bonus structure, at least that I was aware of in my circles. We found out later on there was for some other doctors. And so when I looked into this, the book that influenced me the most is written by Roman Bistianek and Suzanne Humphreys. Roman is the data person and Suzanne's a doctor. And it's called Dissolving Illusions. And it goes through the entire history of this form of medicine, going back to the original observations with smallpox. And there was some nursemaids. Smallpox used to be a serious illness for some, like any other skin rash. The vast majority of skin rashes people do fine with, but some people can get more seriously ill. And it was largely spread from child to child, person to person, in very close living conditions. These pustules, these blisters, people would touch each other and then spread it that way. It actually took physical contact to spread it. It was spread by dirty bed sheets. It was sleep in linens and the virus would be in all the fluid and the kids would sleep in it. So it was essentially a illness of close, crowded living conditions and lack of hygiene. But there was an attempt by nursemaids in the late 18th century of actually trying to inoculate using a related virus called vaccinia, which was cowpox, to try to provide some immunity against smallpox, human smallpox. And then Edward Jenner in England is given all the credit with the very first sets of experiments. But what was born out of this was an ideology. And this was very important. So this is hundreds of years old. And an ideology is a form of religious belief. And you kind of mentioned the word God a few minutes ago. It's a religious belief among doctors, nurses, healthcare personnel, and particularly public health agencies. And this doctrine says we are inherently weak as organisms, as human beings. We're inherently susceptible. But through the brilliance of science and mankind, we can make the human body better. We can improve upon God's creation. We can be more resilient if we actually buy into our own developments, our own biotechnology, whether it's primordial lymph fluid drained from cows and horses and scratched into the arms of humans. Back then, it was even human-to-human vaccines. Now, they couldn't have been sterilized. They couldn't have been free of other organisms. They couldn't even be sure if they actually had vaccinia in it. It was a guess. And so, but the religion was born. Once people bought into this, and this, listen, this was about 100 years of this in the 19th century. This got to such a feverish pitch, it became required to go to school. Kids couldn't go to school unless they took one of these. Parents who said, ooh, they saw other kids dying with this, because if it got contaminated with staph or strep or tetanus or syphilis, you couldn't stop it because there's no antibiotics back then. Parents were horrified seeing other kids die after one of these procedures. And the doctors were the ones that actually did the skin procedure in the arm. Very interesting. And it was a lucrative, procedure for the doctors. This is all laid out in the book by Bistianic and Humphreys. It got so bad that parents were put in jail if their kids were not inoculated. There was uprisings in Toronto, Ontario. There's pictures in downtown Toronto, people in the streets teeming, saying, stop this, stop this. It led to the Anti-V League in the UK, which was a massive uprising. It was a political uprising. It got to the point in the UK around 1902 where they said, listen, we just have to stop the mandates. They had mandates back then. We have to stop the mandates, and immediately people stopped taking these. Okay. Now, the illness, smallpox, did slowly go away. But at the time, it was essentially gone. Only 10% of the world had taken one of these. So it couldn't be due to that. It was the fact that we had improved cleanliness, people spread out, we started washing sheets and had washing machines and electrification of America. And with every other infectious illness, they went down, whether there was a product for it or not. Example, scarlet fever went down, no product. Tuberculosis went down, no product. Strep pharyngitis and strep glomerulonephritis and carditis went down, no product. But other things went down before the products came out. Polio went down, smallpox went down, measles went down, diphtheria, pertussis. They all went dramatically down because of improved hygiene, improved water supply, improved living conditions, long before the products came in that there was such a religious belief in. But because of the fact that there weren't computers back then and how the data was kept, this fed into the belief system. So the diseases going down affirmed to the believers that the products were responsible, that they were essential to eliminate polio. They were essential to eliminate smallpox. And so you'll read textbooks will say the leading public health advancement is the development of these products. Now, the ideology goes a bit further, and it says, listen, these products aren't perfect. Particularly the early versions are not perfect. But for them to work, everybody has to take them. Everybody. And if there's some casualties along the way, they have to take it for the team. There's not going to be a lot of sorrow here. There's not going to be a lot of safety review on any of these. And it's true from the very beginning. There has been a free pass on safety for these products. You got to take it for the team. very limited clinical trials. When safety problems really started to roar up, and in the decades of the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, people started, becoming litigious and say, listen, my kid took one of these routine ones and now they're paralyzed, or they took one of these routine ones and they had a seizure and died, what have you. The company started getting sued. So under President Reagan, HHS and Congress wrote the 1986 legislation, injury compensation legislation, that essentially said the manufacturers who make any one of these products that you're going to take on the routine childhood schedule, or you're going to take during a pandemic crisis, free of liability. So now look at this. Let's say you're a CEO of a biotech company. You want to make a therapy that applies to a limited number of sick people, or do you want to make one of these preventive products that every single human being has to take and you don't have any liability for it? Which one do you want? You can imagine once the company saw this, and in fact, the CDC had a schedule. It rolls out by an organization called ACIP and says, listen, every kid in America has to take these. And then the State Department of Education says, well, yes, we're adopting the CDC schedule. Every kid in the state has to take all of these and prove that they've taken them for them to go to school. Can you imagine if you made one of these products? It's a gold mine. Everybody has to take your product. There's no liability. And even as a capper, if insurance don't cover these, governments will go in and pay for them. So the companies who make these products it is a gravy train of revenue. 1986 was a watershed moment.
Watershed. This is why my son and my daughter have never been inoculated of any kind, which, thank God.
And are they healthy?
They're supremely healthy. I mean, my son is like a strong man. He just parades around our land and picks up boulders. He's super healthy. So is my daughter.
How old are they?
3 and 1. But what's so fascinating about this is if you have systems that are in control, that have been in control for decades, this is actually how you condition people. This is how you condition belief. Noam Chomsky talks about the manufactured consent that we all experience, or we're conscious and we start listening to physicians like you on podcasts like this. And we are opening our minds to something that could be a lie and could have been a lie very well for decades. And I think there's an opportunity cost there. The opportunity cost is that means I have to look in the mirror as a physician, as a mother, as a father, and I have to admit to myself that potentially what I've been sharing or how I've been caring about my community and my family, it actually was harmful to them. But your oath is do no harm. That's your first oath. And it's definitely my unspoken oath as a parent. I never want to harm my children. I would never want to harm my children. So when we learn new information, the information that you've been sharing, I mean, honestly, ever since 2020, 2021, I remember when you were on Rogan, I watched the whole thing like 5 times, right? So that's why it's a really cool moment that you're here. And I think that why the audience has been so looking forward to this episode and why I have is because we are up against some very dynamic energies and forces that you've described from a financial perspective. But do you feel, what is your take on, besides just the financial interest, why do the people that are governing the literature and that are governing the control of information producing this mass psychosis? What is their motivation? What is their inspiration? This has nothing to do with conspiracy. This is actually all in plain sight. What do you believe their truest motivation could be? Like, I just don't understand it. To be inherently malevolent and put out control systems that block people from actually caring for their family and caring for themselves. I just don't understand it. I wonder, as a physician, like, how do you describe what this malevolence and the motivation for it actually is? What is that all about?
Well, let's go back to pre-pandemic. I do believe what was operative was this ideology. And as a medical doctor, and this isn't my field of study, so I didn't critically review every trial and every product. We're simply told they're safe and effective. They're in the background. Kids get them as part of a schedule. I never heard a debate on safety. I never heard a debate on safety of, normal saline or, silastic catheters or plastic syringes. I mean, there's some things in the background. People say, well, Dr. McCullough, you were pushing these before. Well, I wasn't pushing anything. I mean, they're in the background. But what crept in is this idea that you must take them. So, when I showed up to medical school, it was at some point in time, medical school or residency, I can't remember, where I said, well, you have to show your prior vaccine record. Oh, okay, here it is. Well, you may not have titers against measles, mumps, and rubella. You may not have antibody titers. So let's check and see if you do. Oh, you don't? Well, I'll take another one. Well, as a child, I already had mumps, for instance.
Yeah.
I never had measles. I never really thought I'd be threatened by measles. And then rubella, it was a non-issue. Little boys or men don't get, threatening rubella. That's German measles. That only applies to women who are pregnant where there's a congenital rubella syndrome. So none of that applied. And sure enough, I didn't have any titers. And they said, well, you have to take another one. I said, well, I need to enroll. I just didn't question it. That's the point. So when I went back and looked at my my record, my mom had it. I had actually taken 69 different administrations. Now, 40 of them were influenza, 40 of them, and they were annual. So listen, you're coming around to your annual thing. You must show this to make sure your badge is still active at the hospital, to be on medical staff. A couple of times I was delinquent. They said, listen, we are pulling you off of medical staff unless you produce proof that you've gotten one of these. And I scrambled to the emergency room and I get one at midnight on December 31st. I remember doing that a couple of times. It just kind of crept in. But when I looked at my record, and I had mumps as a child, I asked my mom, why did you take me in for 3 more administrations of the mumps product? She goes, well, I don't know. It just came with the others, and the doctor said to do it. So it turns out that over-application of these have gone on for decades. So I was kind of hyper-administered things that I didn't need. I simply didn't need. And then ultimately, it came in, and I want to say this probably dates back to the 1980s where I started taking them because, it was kind of a requirement of which I never really explored an exemption. I'm sure if I, maybe I could have found an exempt pathway. And then it wasn't until later on, we got to the pandemic, where I started to say, wait a minute, this is not adding up. So to give influenza as an example, I decided for the first time in my career that I was going to have an exemption for the annual product. And I filled out an exemption. I was on medical staff at a major medical center, and I turned it, I'm exempt. And then again, I started getting these threatening notices. You're going to get thrown off medical staff. I said, listen, I filled out an exemption. Well, where did you submit it? What office did you submit it to? Well, who approved it? Well, I said, well, aren't you guys the office? And no, we don't communicate with that office. And I realized, wait a minute, hardly anybody ever submits exemptions. They don't communicate with one another. I mean, I bet I had 20 emails, 15 phone calls. I mean, this really became a big deal to be exempt from a flu shot. So in Texas, we have, by law, we have philosophical, religious, and medical exemptions. You don't have to take these. If you're philosophical.
God bless Texas. That's why we moved here.
Right. Now some states, like California, New York, Connecticut, as an example, they effectively have none. Mm-hmm. There is a medical exemption pathway that is simply not achievable for parents to get. Mm-hmm. So I started realizing, wait a minute, this is a big deal to lay out that you want to be exempt from this. And that was influenza. I had already had the pandemic illness in October of 2020, and I knew something was wrong because we were studying what the natural protection was going to be. It looked great at the time. In fact, when I went on Joe Rogan, I said, listen, it's holding out so good that you almost, it's one and done. It was one and done until we had the latest variant breakthrough. The Omicron broke through. And then, it was like 2 days after I went on Rogan, it became clear you could get it twice. But I had it once. I felt great. I was the only one in my division that had been through it. And people were out in the lobby saying, well, we're giving them out now. Come out and get yours. I got a text. I said, no, I already had it. I'm good. And then I get a text back, well, get one anyway. I said, well, I already had it. Who are you getting
this text from?
I was getting it from one of the nurses operating the table out in the lobby. somebody who I knew. I said, well, no, I've already had it. And then I looked into this, and there were already early papers, one by, and what I'll do on this program, as I always do, by the way, I'm probably the only physician guest on any show that cites the data. I actually cite the data first author, so you can go look up the paper. So anybody listening to this, you can look up the paper. I think it's interesting that no one else either can or will do it, which is stunning. And I've done it on Fox News. I've been on Fox News dozens, if not hundreds of times, prime time. I did it on Rogan. I had my computer out. I told the Spotify producers, I'm going pinpoint on these. Did it on Tucker Carlson. No one else will do it. So interesting. But the papers were, first author was Raw, Kramer, and Methodius, 3 separate papers that said, listen, if you already had it, if you already had the illness, and you're already through it, you already raised this immune response, the last thing you want to do is re-stimulate the body with taking it in the arm. And if you took it in the arm, the side effects were way worse. These were early papers. Like there was no way I was going to take this. Some of the side effects landed people in the hospital. But yet from the very beginning, this is December of 2020, they said, well, just kind of take it anyway. Take it kind of for good measure or good luck or take it for compliance reasons. That was before there was any mandate. So it was in people's minds. Why did my mom take me in and the doctor said I needed 3 more mumps shots when I already had mumps? It was the same thinking. The same thinking went on in the 1960s and 70s as it was in the pandemic. It's part of this kind of mindless religious belief system in this area of biotechnology.
Yes. So this is why there's the story, and you've probably heard this before. There's the mother that always cuts the ham when she puts it in the oven. And the daughter says, well, why do you do that? And she said, well, because grandma always did that. And so then daughter went and asked grandma, why do you cut the ham when you put it in the oven? And she said, oh, well, because we've always done that. And then they looked in old journals and they found the great-great-grandmother. And they found that she just had such a small oven, she had to cut the ham. But since then, everyone's been cutting the ham, no matter how big their oven is. People do essentially what they've been taught, and they don't question it because that's what's, quote, always been done. But what's really scary and so serious, I mean, it's such a serious topic, but I had to add a little levity with the story about the oven. It's so serious because there's so many lives at stake. There's so much safety and there's so much danger that could happen in the future if we don't open up our minds to this conversation. So I know that people have had their lives lost from what occurred, but also we look at the other side of it. And the lockdowns were truly a theater. I mean, look at the research in PubMed that's been published over and over hundreds and hundreds of times about child abuse, eating disorders, and just negative ramifications of all kinds that were forced upon people in good measure, as you say. 6 feet apart, double mask, in your car, on the airplane, stay at home. All these things that came down in good measure were actually, the prevention became 20 times more deleterious than the cure. Did you see this unfolding and were your colleagues saying, hey, we should actually go speak about this? And was that some of the fuel for you to begin really being prominent on podcasts and on media because you just simply couldn't sleep at night unless you spoke about it? And by the way, how do these people that don't speak about it sleep at night?
I wore a mask continuously for 3 years in the hospital. And when the very early parts of the pandemic, the masks immediately evaporated. They used to be in little boxes in the lobby and outside the operating room in the cath lab, what have you. They actually evaporated. People were grabbing masks like crazy. People would be, walking past the building, jump into the lobby, grab a handful of masks. People were in panic mode.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget one of the fellows, and actually division chief, got a complaint submitted to compliance at the hospital. It's in my book, Courage to Face the Illness. And the nurses were complaining they're unnecessarily using masks. They're unnecessarily using masks. The nurses were concerned that, masks should be conserved for people who really needed them. And so then when the masks came out, we were just wearing the surgical ones. And the ones that actually tied this way and tied this way. So it was always 2 sets of ties. It wasn't no elastic band. And then there was an announcement, and this went on for months. So months I had one. I could actually kind of smell myself in the mask because that's all there was. It was just one mask. That's it. And and we're told we had to wear it. Then there was an announcement that we had N95 masks. So we had to go to an occupational medicine office to be fitted for the N95. We went up there and this mask was fitted, and then this gas, and could we smell it? And it was trying to block it out. It was such a ordeal. And we were granted 4 masks. So the masks were in a paper bag, the old brown paper bag, and immediately what most people did, we were frightened. I came home and I told my wife, here, take one of them. You need one of these. I mean, we were naturally frightened. We didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
So then we guarded these N95 masks for many months without replacements, and we're told to wear them. And this went on for the longest period of time. And I'll never forget when we finally got to, and people ask me, what's your view on masks? And I know some people, that was their signature issue. So for instance, my wife, she was not going to wear a mask. And one time we were in Love Field Airport and she goes, I'm not wearing a mask. I said, well, somebody's going to talk to you. She goes, I don't care, let them. And I said,
love it.
And I said, listen, Love Field has just bought a giant 7-foot robot with these electronic eyes, and he's wandering around trying to identify people without masks. So you're going to have that robot chasing you down the concourse. And he goes, let him try to chase me. She was going to go. She was going to go on mask. And people, I'd go on Laura Ingraham on Fox News all the time. And people would ask me, and I said, listen, I think it's not my signature issue. I think it's a giant distraction. The biggest issue here is people are not getting early treatment, and seniors are being hospitalized and dying. My heart was broken over this. In my book, there's a chapter on my dad who was, flat on his back in a senior home. He had a pelvic fracture, sick with the illness, and people worried about masks. I wanted Dad to get treatment so he doesn't end up on the ventilator. I mean, to me, that was the biggest issue, was treatment, and I was willing to kind of go along with this mask situation as a charade. But I do have to tell you, I learned a lot about masks when I was asked to go to University of Nebraska and give an on-campus presentation in one of their big facilities. And I was one of several speakers. So one of the other speakers that showed up was an engineer, very, very bright guy. He was very meticulous, and he was studying masks and the typical masks that people were wearing. And he'd done a whole series of experiments. He said 17% of the air goes around the mask, just goes around it. He goes, for starters. And then, of course, the virion particles are so small, they just go right through. And there was these experiments. You could wear 10 masks, and it just goes right through. And it's been implied by others that, in fact, if you wear these, the fibers from the mask actually go in the lungs. Now you have this stuff in your lungs from the mask. They impair ventilation. There was one time I was on Fox News with Laura Ingraham, and they had showed a girl, and they were all forcing all the track runners at this high school to wear masks. So she was running the 1,000 meters. Yes, she was wearing a mask in the 1,000 meters. And there, at that point in time, there's a parameter in medicine called minute ventilation, which is the amount of air you can move at your maximum respiratory rate in terms of liters. And at that level, a mask will impair minute ventilation. You just can't move the air as much, right? Yeah. And she just collapses on the track and just destroys her shoulder, and she's just a mess, and her parents are on. And you saw probably reels of people driving with them on, swimming with them on.
The craziest ones were people in the band where they'd cut a slit and they would play the saxophone through the mask.
Or how about the little
this
kids?
Makes zero sense.
The little kids in the plastic teepees.
Yes.
And so in my book, and I encourage everyone to get it, it's a quick read. It's about 2.5 hours. It's written by John Leake, who in the genre, he's the only best-selling author, true crime historian author to write a book in the era. And like I said, the only one to be banned on Amazon. Our ban was 12 days long because we just, had lots of people get involved because saying, listen, this is, a book is not a Twitter account. You just don't censor a book. A book is a work of literary art. And we prevailed. But in our book, there's a scene where there's a guy who's so frustrated. He's in San Francisco. He's frustrated with the lockdowns. So he gets on a paddleboard with his dog, and he just paddles way out in this lagoon. He's way out there, sunny day, no mask. And then the Coast Guard come with the light on and they go speeding out to him in order to, fine him for not wearing a mask.
Oh my God.
So it actually shows. And this is
how deep the psychosis runs.
Oh yeah. And so I remember watching CNN. So one of my contemporaries is Sanjay Gupta. So I went to University of Michigan School of Public Health. Gupta did his residency there. I think went to medical school and residency there. His family actually lived in Novi. I lived in Northville just, for a long time in Michigan. So right there, he's one of my contemporaries, a little bit younger than me. And I'll never forget him castigating some B-roll of a guy jogging on the Embarcadero. The guy had no shirt on. He was jogging, no mask. I mean, he was doing all the right things. He was getting fresh air. He was getting vitamin D. And the data started pouring in that people who are outside either didn't get the illness or it was a much milder case. Data from Singapore demonstrated you actually really couldn't transmit it outside. And I'll never forget that first year when we got to the Super Bowl. You remember we got to the Super Bowl? That was the Super Bowl in 2021. And that's when New England regrettably got rid of Tom Brady. And so Tom goes to the Tampa Bay Bucks. And the Bucks are playing, I'm trying to think who they played. They played the Chiefs. And at that time, they have this stadium. And I remember I went on some podcasts and I said, you know what? If this is early 2021, if someone's already had the illness, they should be rewarded and just be allowed to go in the stadium and watch the game. Why not? Instead, what they did is they essentially had closed this whole thing and they let like 12 people who had taken one of the early products, early biotech products, they were, quote, protected, go in and watch the game. It was just a travesty. I'll never forget the Stanley Cup that year. Stanley Cup, I know because Dallas was in it against Tampa Bay. That was the year Tampa Bay won both the Super Bowl and the Stanley Cup. They were playing in that arena up in Canada where no one was there. They had black covers over the entire, it was the most eerie thing. And sadly, the Dallas Stars ran out of steam and they lost against Tampa Bay. But I'll never forget that the idea they wouldn't let people in these large congregate settings outside. And if we've learned anything, humans need to be around one another. We probably actually changed immune patterns by having kids not on top of each other, not getting these immune challenges. Clearly, we did a great disservice.
So what happened with your wife and the robot?
Fortunately, the robot never found her. She was able to kind of dart in, and she would invariably get in a tussle with the flight attendants.
Yes.
Where the mask would be off, and she said, well, I'll have some apple juice. And she would just kind of nurse that apple juice and have to have the mask off. And there were people there was somebody in my Bible study who had made these masks out of the thinnest lingerie you could imagine. I mean, see-through, see-through.
Yes.
And saying, that's a mask. And the masks began to symbolize something, and that was compliance. I think it became a representative of fear, of personal fearfulness. And in reality, we had always worn masks in medicine largely, a lot of people don't know this, largely because healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, about 25% of us have staphylococcal colonization of our nasopharynx. We actually have staph, pathogenic staph in our noses. So if we're in an operation, we're doing open heart surgery, and a surgeon has an uncontrolled sneeze with no mask on, that snot with the staphylococcus can go right into the wound, an open chest wound, and cause staphylococcal meningitis. It can be fatal. So we actually wear masks in healthcare not to protect ourselves, but to protect the patients against our staph nasal carriage.
But this is actually the most important point. I remember I was in the airport here in Austin. It was my birthday. I was flying somewhere. And there was this woman, and I'll speak with respect about her. She was morbidly obese. She had a 64-ounce soda in her hand. And I had told Carrie Michelle, I'm like, I'm going to go in there just like your wife. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm going to just do this experiment where I don't wear the mask. And this woman starts screaming at me in the line. And she says, "You're going to hurt us. You're going to kill us." And I just thought, wow, the irony of this moment. Here I am, a health conscious person wanting to just breathe clean air, being yelled at by a woman who's morbidly obese, holding a huge soda, just the absolute insanity that I think we're all experiencing. It became this bifurcation, really almost in religion, like you had talked about, where for hundreds of years, this was handed down that you must get you must get the jab, you must get the shot. So what was so fascinating to me is like people fell in line, not because they were just told to. It became this signal of their own righteousness, their own self-righteousness and virtue, where if I'm wearing a mask, that I'm doing good for you. I'm actually in service to you because I'm wearing a mask on me.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think really it split people into two, because there are people that, like myself, who believe in freedom and autonomy and in medical freedom, where it's so funny because there's a crowd that says my body, my choice, but those were the first people to wear the mask, and it really wasn't a choice for them. But for the rest of us, when we really want to make free choices about our body, it has to come from what we actually believe. What we actually believe is real for us. And what was so fascinating during that whole time, your wife experienced it, I experienced it, so many of us experienced it, is that we weren't able to exercise this freedom of our body, of ourself.
Well, isn't that such a paradox? So my body, my choice, people generally associate it with a term or a concept of liberal.
Sure,
my body, my choice, liberal. Free to be you and me. All lives matter. Our protest matters. We should protest and go out in the streets, right? That's part of this. But when it came to the pandemic, no, you must wear a mask. You need to protect others. So the word liberal, actually, in terms of like civil liberties, libertarian, that no longer applied. Actually, I don't use that word. Now, the word conservative is interesting, because conservative, you start to think, well, geez, do I look conservative to you? I got a tie on, I got a shirt, no tattoos crawling up my neck. I look conservative, right? And I probably am conservative. But you say, wait a minute, conservative, I think that's a term that applies to money. You're conservative, you're careful. Ever since the Bush administration, George W. Bush, then into Obama and Trump and Biden, we've had decades of zero financial conservatism. Zero. We've had reckless, wild, unbridled spending. Unbridled. So I don't use the word conservative over here, and I don't use the word liberal over here. They don't apply anymore because of these paradoxes. I'll just use the term right for right wing, and I'll use the term left for left wing. And the other interesting thing is other countries in the world typically don't have two parties. They have more. But I think we need to get rid of this conservative versus liberal thing for that reason.
Yeah.
Now, civil liberties is worth talking about. If a man is in jail, he's in a single person block, a prison cell, and you say, you're incarcerated. We're going to feed you some food and water, and you're incarcerated. Now, you have nothing to do. All you could do is kind of do push-ups and sit-ups and stare at the wall. It's pretty much what you could do. That man in prison has more civil liberty than someone who's said, listen, you have to take it in the arm or lose your job. You have to take it in the arm or be kicked out of school or kicked out of the military. Think about that. Someone shoves something in your arm against your will or shoves a pill down your throat. Now your bodily autonomy has been affronted. Your bodily autonomy has been threatened, has been violated. Particularly something in the arm that's genetic, that can never leave the body. The man in prison who is controlling his own body, he has more freedom. He has more freedom. So when I gave my Lincoln Memorial Address, January of 2022, tens of thousands of people on the mall. I was the first scientific speaker. I gave a 7-minute speech. And I finished by saying, listen, there are circles of freedom. There's a circle of medical freedom. That's your personal health freedom. It's linked to your circle of social freedom, and that is linked to your economic freedoms. They're all linked. But what's fundamental is this inalienable right that you decide what happens to your body with no pressure, coercion, or threat of reprisal. You know, that's number 1 in the Nuremberg Code. We have seen for the first times in our lives, this has been creeping in. Now, if we were alive around 1897 in Philadelphia, Boston, Toronto, London, Leicester, England, we would have seen it then too. This violation of our inalienable rights. And our rights are life free to whatever we want to do, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. You take one of these in the arm and you're unlucky to have a cardiac arrest or a blood clot, your life and liberty have been threatened, in some cases completely taken away from you with no recourse.
Well, it goes back to the initial question too, that you began to answer, but I feel like there's one more layer there. And you had said for so long, you gave the examples of you being inoculated when you were a child and your mother did it because she was told. And when you're a physician, you had to go on December 31st and get it just because you were told. But there's something much deeper and more sinister here that I think is worth shining light on before we get to the solution, because there's many beautiful solutions for people that have gone through getting these forced inoculations. But what's so fascinating to me is, and I'll go back to this again, I've had a guest on the show, a 40-year Buddhist who calls it Wetiko, which is the Native American term for mind virus. And so I wonder, you talked about the medical coercion and the loss of autonomy and the prisoner actually having more freedom than people who were forced. Under threat, by the way, because it was a threat. It's not this narrative where, oh, they didn't actually have to get it. Well, you could just lose your job and then not feed your family. That's forced. That's still coerced. But there's another layer, and I wonder how you feel about this other layer. It's a deeper psychological layer. This psychosis that has been created by the people in the highest positions of power. What is their true motivation? What is their truest motivation here that would make them roll out these things that steal our liberty and steal our freedom? What do you believe that actually is?
Every podcaster wants to immediately get to the motivation. Like, wouldn't you want to interview Klaus Schwab?
I actually would not. I would not even want to give him airtime.
Well, wouldn't you want to interview Trump?
I mean, that would be really interesting. That'd be fun. That would be a fun
What would you
one.
ask him in this area? What would you ask him?
I would ask him, hey, you've made all this money. Why even be a president and why even be in control? Like, what are you getting from this? What is your ultimate goal? Is it for the greater good or is it for your own egoic growth? Yeah. I would ask him something like that.
I'd ask him, listen.
He may be like, well, I'm the greatest. That would be his answer.
I'd say, listen, I have us at about 600,000 Americans have lost their life after taking one of these.
Yeah.
I said, that's worse than Civil War casualties. What do you have to say about that, Mr. President? No one has asked him the question. No one has asked that question of any world leader. From an open mic, no one's ever faced the question of the disability, the injuries, disabilities, and deaths that have occurred after this. Isn't that stunning?
That's wild.
Talk about a mass psychosis. I mean, nobody in the press corps can kind of think this is important. We've watched countless public figures go down. You just watch this roll out. No one can actually even conjure up the question, let alone get a response. People always want to get to motive. Let's cover this mass psychosis, though, because I did write one of the comments on the book by Matthias Desmet, the Psychology of Totalitarianism. Now, he goes back to Arendt, who writes a lot about what happened in World War II. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, why, as they ushered people into the gas chambers, how come they weren't fighting for their lives? Why did they just kind of walk into the gas chambers? You'd think they'd be dragging people into the gas chambers. What happened to this? How did people actually begin to subscribe to the ideology there? Well, it took years. It took propaganda. Propaganda, very important. The office, they had an office of propaganda in Nazi Germany led by Goebbels. And their classic propaganda terms and tools, there's 6 of them that are being used today in today's pandemic. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, anti-VR, anti-science, conspiracy theorist. So when someone uses those terms, understand that they're somehow into this formation or this biopharmaceutical complex, which we think is actually a more intentional, operational syndicate.
This is what I'm getting at, this intentional syndicate.
Yeah, but the point is, when someone says, you're spreading misinformation, they are immediately grabbing moral superiority, and they're saying, I hold information. I hold agency over the truth, so therefore I am going to put you down as spreading misinformation. Or how about this? Dr. Peter Hotez in Houston. He's kind of one of my contemporaries, slightly junior to me academically. His mantra is, he goes on college campuses. This is his theme. He's written a book on this. The deadly rise of anti-science. Because he holds science. He thinks science is something you hold, you have agency over, and someone else is spreading anti-science. Well, science is a process. There are always data and observations, and there's multiple points of view. So we're early in this, it's a multi-year process of this rapidly evolving pandemic. No one holds the truth. No one holds the right answer and someone else holds the wrong answer. They're simply changing data sets, and we have multiple interpretive points of view. Yet the American Board of Internal Medicine, which governs the largest number of doctors in the United States by far, came out with a misinformation policy in the fall of 2021. Said anybody who violates this, we're going to go after you. And they are stripping people of their residencies or fellowships, just essentially ruining their entire career over this without any ability to define what they're talking about, going ex post facto, no due process, no equal protections, no following no rules of evidence. This is essentially what happened in Nazi Germany. People said, listen, you're spreading misinformation about the Third Reich. We're going to pay you a visit. And that's exactly what happened. This happened over time. Mass formation. It is Desmond says there has to be several elements. There has to be continual free-floating anxiety, fear, in this case generated over a pathogen that you could infect us all. We could all get sick over and over again. And then isolation. We have to feel isolated, that we're locked down. We can't talk to our friends. We can't. And then a solution is provided. Here, just take it in the arm and you'll be set free. Remember when Schwarzenegger said, screw your freedoms?
Oh, that was the worst.
Remember that? Screw your freedoms.
Never watched Terminator again.
And do you remember everybody in Hollywood all at once?
Yeah.
You take it. You can't get it. You're protected. I'll never forget on Saturday Night Live, there was this skit and they all took it and they were happy, dancing and jumping around. I said, this is macabre. This is really, really nuts. So for me, this switch was flipped, I want to say early in 2020. I was leading the world in concepts on how to treat the illness early. And listen, I'm not an infectious disease doctor. I'm board certified in internal medicine and cardiology. I'm in the maintenance of certification process, but I saw nothing from my infectious disease colleagues about what to do with the next sick person who got the illness. No one was doing anything. So I published the first version of McCullough Protocol. It was August of 2020 in the American Journal of Medicine. And I was going to go to New England, but New England had just published a completely fraudulent paper on one of the drugs. I said, oh my God, New England's is completely gone to fraud. So I went to American Journal of Medicine. It was a very highly ranked journal. It was published there, multiple letters to the editor, multiple responses. That's the way it's supposed to happen. And to this day, that paper has stood there as the very first paper that said, we can treat the illness. And when I went on Tucker Carlson, I said, Tucker, I am astounded at what I'm seeing. People are getting sick. They are going to their doctors and clinics and hospitals, and they're saying, go home. There's no treatment for this. And you wait until you're sick enough to come to the hospital and we'll put you on the ventilator. Can you imagine the terror of senior citizens in their apartments of this illness? That was the most terrifying thought ever. There's no treatment for this. My doctor won't do anything for me. And if I get it, I'm vulnerable. I'm older, I've got heart and lung disease, I'm living by myself, I'm a diabetic, I'm going to go in the hospital, I will never see my loved ones again, and I'll probably die on a ventilator. Talk about fear. That fear was overwhelming, and that was necessary for this mass formation psychosis. And it was overwhelming fear. But the big part of it was no treatment, that the virus is unassailable. That's the reason why I think the bad guys had to suppress me and anybody in my circle, because we were providing hope that we could treat the illness. In fact, we were probably more than hope. We were providing proven methods to actually take an edge off the virus. We weren't curing things. But if we can reduce the intensity and duration of symptoms and just get people through this to the other side, then it's survivable. It's a very slow-moving illness. Even at the initial phases, it took 6 weeks for someone to die. I mean, we had plenty of time to intervene. And on my podcast, McCullough Report, I started interviewing people all over the world. I interviewed doctors in Asia, deep into Asia, in the Thai Peninsula, elsewhere. I said, what are you guys doing? They said, well, we don't have any drugs over here. I said, well, how are you treating people? Oh, we're doing pretty much what we did during the Spanish flu. And I said, what's that? We're using aromatic vapors, poultices, other things. If we can just calm people down, the older people get it and they get pretty sick, we can just calm them down. We just get them through the illness without panicking. Once panic sets in, it's over with. And I reviewed a paper early on about paramedic runs in the United States. This is in through 2020. And the vast majority of time that paramedics went out to a senior citizen apartment or a nursing home or home, the person was not direly sick. They weren't, matter of fact, they had to put very few people on the ventilator in the field. It was panic. It was sheer panic. So I think putting it together, and it's in my book, I think this syndicate formed, and I think this biopharmaceutical complex formed. They learned that if they can do gain-of-function research and support gain-of-function research, of which the National Institutes of Health fully supported, the Gates Foundation fully supported, the Rockefeller Foundation. They're in the business of gain-of-function research, that pathogens can be made, what I call biological threats, and at the same time do research on solutions, therapeutics, monoclonal antibodies, and various forms of inoculations. If you hold both of those, you'll hold power. And what happened is, I think it was probably accidental what happened in Wuhan. Maybe it was intentional. It happened. And when that happened, a playbook was operationalized. And the playbook was announced. One of the best books to read about the playbook is 19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey. And it's written by Peter Bregan and Ginger Bregan. I wrote one of the introductions. And he outlines there were 36 pandemic preparedness planning events. Looking back, going back to the 2005 PrEP Act. PrEP Act was written after SARS-1 and after the anthrax scare. It was HHS and Congress wrote this act that said, we will be invaded by a pathogen. There will be a pandemic. It's memorialized in that 2005 U.S. government regulation. It says it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It actually even names the class of organisms that actually really happen. So it's going to be one of them. And when it happens, it's going to be like an act of war. It's as if we're invaded. And there's going to be countermeasures. And the countermeasures is whatever the government says: masks, lockdowns, inoculations, drugs. And the countermeasures will be done. The government will control them, largely be rolled out by the Department of Defense, and everybody must do them, and with no exceptions, and they're free from liability. Importantly, free from liability. That was the PrEP Act. So Bregan says, going back there, listen, they're calling it. There's 36 of these events where I said, wait a minute, there's other things that were happening all over the world. 25 of them have written documents like the PrEP. You can just read it. Just read it and see what it says. And then 6 are filmed. Those are just, wow, just watch it happen. So Gates Foundation, which is part of the complex, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, they hold a planning exercise. It says there's a SPARS pandemic that's going to happen. It's a tabletop exercise, SPARS. It's going to be a virus in this field. Okay.
It was a practice.
Yeah, it's
it was
going to be.
Practicing.
It's practice. Now, this is going to happen. In fact, it's going to come out of China. And it's 2017. They write up, over an 80-page write-up of this. And when it happens, there's going to be a lot of confusion over a drug. But we're not going to let the public get too confused over it. We're going to tell them the solution is for everybody to take it in the arm. That is the solution. And we're going to find ways of stamping out any hesitancy in taking it in the arm. In fact, we'll even involve the President of the United States. It's in the SPARS pandemic, okay? When the real pandemic rolls out, Johns Hopkins said, we called it. They actually published 2 peer-reviewed papers saying, we called it. Look at, we called it. It was amazing. Then I think the most phenomenal is Event 201. Now, Event 201 happens in October of 2019. That's a live meeting. We've got U.S. government officials there. We've got worldwide officials, Gates Foundation, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And there they say, yeah, well, for sure it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's coming out of China. And we're going to have all kinds of work groups. Avril Haines, who's our current director of national intelligence, she's there at Event 201. She's a former World Economic Forum operative. She's our director of national intelligence. She's there, and she's paired up with George Gao, who's the CDC director for China. And their part of the thing is, how do we actually handle the news that it comes out of a lab versus coming out of nature? Actually, in a sense, how to deceive the world on this. So when you hear the word pandemic, a lot of it comes from Peter Bregan's book to say, listen, this was kind of laid out ahead of time. Now, did you know any of this in 2019?
Of course not.
Me neither.
Yeah.
And I'm a doctor.
There'd be no motivation to learn about it.
Yeah, I'm a doctor. I'm in internal medicine and cardiology. I was traveling the world, and I had no clue this was going on, that it was so strongly telegraphed. But how about all these other people involved? Gates Foundation, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, Johns Hopkins. Now, isn't it interesting that the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health was the data feed to CNN and all the news agencies on the case count and the mortality? Do you remember this in January, February, March?
It was like a ticker, and everybody wondered where the data actually came from and how it came so fast.
Right. How did it come so fast? How did they know how to do this? I was baffled at the mortality. During the pandemic, I filled out some death certificates. Now, let me tell you, as a doctor, when a patient dies and they ultimately end up at the funeral home, and that's kind of where the death certificate starts, at the funeral home. This is after the hospital.
Weeks.
This is after whether or not there's an autopsy, and there was a moratorium on autopsy. This is weeks before they get to the funeral home. Funeral homes were having, a couple week delays before they even had cremations or funerals. I remember this because this came up for my dad. So for sure, from the time someone died to the time the initiation of the death certificate started, I'd say easily 4 weeks. Now, from the time I got involved, and there's a Texas system I have to log in on, and I have to look things up and verify things, that could be another 6 weeks. We're talking 10 weeks per death. How are they coming up with this instantaneous number that no one could either validate or at all? And it was happening worldwide. They knew it everywhere in the world. Listen, I've been to some parts of the world. I'm not sure how they can possibly even figure out who died or who didn't.
They do it by carrier pigeon there.
Yeah, there's some crazy places in the world where there's a lot of confusion. So all of this is enormously suspect. And then when we get to January 2020, and this is where the House Select Subcommittee on the investigations is so important, Brad Wenstrup chairs the committee. And by the way, I appeared on Fox News with him directly probably about a month ago, where in 2020, Anthony Fauci gets some emails from some esteemed virologists who are funded by his division. One of them is Christian Anderson at Scripps. Another one is Edwin Holmes at University of Sydney, Dr. Rambut from Scotland. They email him and say, listen, this virus looks like it came out of the lab. This doesn't look like a natural virus at all. They're kind of studying the behavior of this. And then Fauci, with the assistance of Jeremy Farrar, who is the lead scientist at the Wellcome Trust at this time. How are these guys so linked so early? It's in our book how this happens. They hold a conference call. And at the end of the conference call, it's decided, and this is in the emails and all the communications, that they are going to intentionally deceive the world and say it came out of nature, when they knew it was a U.S.-Chinese collaboration. They knew it. And Christian Andersen publishes the very first paper. It says the proximal origins of the virus. And it comes out of nature. Now, the WHO says, well, we're going to investigate the source of this. And Rear Admiral Brett Giroir, who went to the same medical school I did in Dallas, Southwestern, just a few years ahead of time, well-respected man. He was on the first task force for Trump. He says, fine. He nominates 3 eminent scientists to represent the United States, independent of all this, to go investigate Wuhan. The WHO, under Tedros Ghebreyesus, says, no, we don't want these independent scientists. We want Peter Daszak, the head of the EcoHealth Alliance, to, quote, investigate. So Daszak, he's part of the conspiracy team. He's with Ralph Baric, Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Xingling Li, the bat lady, and the U.S.-Chinese collaboration that made the chimeric. So he's part of the problem. He's asked to investigate. Daszak goes over, he goes, well, I'm not sure where it came from, but I'll tell you one thing, it didn't come out of the lab. All of this happened. And there were 12 fraudulent papers published in the peer-reviewed literature, still not retracted, saying that it came out of nature when it really came out of the lab. Now, why would this matter? If they were honest and said, you know what, we had a project with the Chinese. These 2 papers we published in 2015 in Nature Medicine and 2016 Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where Menachery is the first author. And the name on the paper says a SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 virus poised for human emergence. That's actually what got out. That's it. That's the primordial chimeric strain. If they just said that to begin with, we could have had a big head start on treating, avoiding complications. But this smokescreen that it came out of nature put the medical response months behind. It costs lives. This is well documented. That's the reason why there are books written by Robert F. Kennedy and by Senator Rand Paul saying that Anthony Fauci should be in jail.
Mm-hmm. Or capital punishment. I mean, I don't wish death on people, but when you knowingly understand that your decisions will take the lives of innocent people, then that's true evil. That's actually someone who's operating from a place of either psychopathy or they're connected to some Wetiko that I mentioned earlier. And this is why, you know, it's so interesting. I know that you've been censored so much, and that's why it's so important that we're here. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, this is probably going to be one of the most downloaded, most popular episodes, because it's like people have forgotten, Dr. McCullough. They've forgotten the tragedy and the travesty that we've been through, because it's just simply not on the screen anymore. It's not on the TV anymore. It's just so wild, the things that you're talking about. No one is talking about them anymore. There's this cognitive dissonance where we want to go back to our white picket fences in our lives and just like have the happy Americana that we had before. But it actually has been probably since the turn of the century that a lot of the Americana that we actually think is real is not, whether you look at taxation and common law and even the inoculations or just the medical, industrial, food and insurance complex, how they all work together, all the connections that you've made with the WHO and Fauci and all these webs that get aligned. It just goes back to my question, which maybe there's no answer for it. There's probably no answer for it.
What is the motivation? Well, just look at the complex feeding itself. The Gates Foundation makes a strategic investment in BioNTech. A biotech company has never had a product before. And boom, they have this incredible joint product with a major U.S. pharmaceutical company for the very first inoculation December 10th. Gates Foundation makes a gazillion on that investment. 9 out of the 10 last FDA commissioners, they work in the complex. So Scott Gottlieb, one of my contemporaries, former FDA commissioner, he works for the big blue pharmaceutical company and advising people on CNBC to take it in the arm. He's a former FDA commissioner. Stephen Hahn, the one who was in power, who blocked treatments, he's works for Flagship, the venture capital firm for Moderna. The top public health director in the UK works directly for Moderna. The top public health director for Denmark now works for the company. So what happened is these people in these positions must have been contacted by one of these entities and said, you know what, if you do a good job for us, we've got a very lucrative job for you in a year or two. Jeremy Farrar, who was the lead scientist at Rockefeller Foundation, where is he now? He's the lead scientist for the WHO. They're big time. They're probably one of the main coordinating centers in this syndicate. Rick Bright, who was in the White House, he fought so we could not release the stockpile of HCQ out to people, a vital drug to treat it. He now works for the Rockefeller Foundation. They're in the complex. So these NGOs are very important because they can't be regulated. They can invest in things and they're not for profit, so they can actually really, reap tremendous profits. They can have incredible influence on things. They can really grease the wheel. They can hold planning exercises. They can actually purchase product and distribute it. The NGOs are important. We think this biopharmaceutical complex, as I've outlined, controls trillions of dollars. It's limitless what they can do. They influence agencies. So we know government agencies were inside social media. They came out in Missouri versus Biden. So the FBI, the CIA, and other agencies in the intelligence community and the CDC have officers and people either inside Twitter or electronically inside Twitter monitoring the feeds. So I got a FOIA on myself. I said, well, who's monitoring me? I have the biggest doctor account in Twitter of specialty doctors who see patients. I'm like a prize, right? So I would have a tweet on something, on some part of the immune system early in 2021. Emails. Dr. McCullough just tweeted this. What do you think he means? And you could see the operatives go back and forth. I said, oh my gosh. Who's listening to this right now? You better believe somebody's assigned to me. Many people are assigned to me. Anybody who's a dissonant voice is going to be listened to, is going to be censored, will have pressures applied in all different ways. Your jobs, if the jobs don't matter, it'll just keep going and going and going. This is no different than Nazi Germany. But nobody will stand in the way of this narrative. Not even presidential candidates will stand in the way of this narrative. The narrative is there is a new sheriff in town. There is a new world order. When Klaus Schwab wrote the book and said, is the opportunity to reset a new world order, he was very serious. He said, listen, it's not going to be about countries anymore. It's going to be about borderless countries. There's going to be tremendous control from central nerve centers, probably this complex being one of them. They're very well coordinated. When he wrote his book in 2017, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, he said, listen, there's going to be a revolution. It's not going to be machines this time or computers. The environment's going to, is going to stay the same. The human body and mind is going to change. That's the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The motivation by those who are speaking for the complex, and I think Klaus Schwab is one, I think Tedros Ghebreyesus is another, I think Bill Gates is another, Yuval Harari, you can probably round them up. They're relatively visible. Everything seems to be open. There's the theme. One of the themes is too many useless eaters. Too many people. There's a perception there's too many people on this earth. God, you just fly across Canada and you show me the people. Fly across the coast of Australia and you find hundreds of miles. You can't find a single person on the beach. I can't imagine somebody would come up with that notion, but there's a notion that that's the case. There's also a notion that we should move to the collective as opposed to the individual. Now, the collective has been part of Eastern societies for a long, long time. Chinese, if you've ever been to China 5 times, spent a lot of time with the Chinese, they really believe in the collective. And they think that individualism offers some threat to the collective. Here in the United States, we're about as individualistic as you can get. We're going to go out and blaze a new trail. We're going to, build new greatness everywhere we go. So individualism and collectivism are at odds with one another. The Great Reset and this new world order says the collective is going to predominate here. And we see it's not just the pandemic and its response. We've seen farmers in Europe, just up in arms. The European Commission had said, listen, we don't have enough green space, so we need to set aside a percentage of green space, of which the farmers did. So, most countries, let's take the Netherlands as an example, almost all of it is kind of on farms. It's either in cities or farms. So they set aside some large proportion, I think 20% or more, for green space, and they did it. Okay, that was several years ago. And then this New World Order, whoever influences the European Commission, said that's not enough. The nitrogen that's kind of running down onto the green space is changing the plant flora of the green space. And it's largely the manure from the cows that it's actually pretty healthy manure. It's just kind of hyper-fertilizing the green space, and so the plants are changing. That's changing the natural ecostructure. So therefore, we have to reduce the amount of farms with cows on them. And that's where now all these countries started to have these new rules where you can't have so many cows, you can't have so many acres assigned to livestock. This happened across the Netherlands. It happened across Germany in part. It happened across Ireland. And you saw protests, really pretty wild protests where the farmers were spraying manure on buildings, blocking roads. So this complex, this biopharmaceutical complex that we've identified, it's not just infectious diseases. It's farming. It is clearly something about climate. This is really interesting. Do you know that there are people in this world who absolutely believe the existential threat to humanity is global warming?
Of course.
Now, I don't know about your circles, but my circles is that 99% of those people who believe that, they're on the left. If it's an existential crisis, why would this be politically on one side of something? For an existential crisis, something that's going to wipe us out, right? I think everybody would care about that. Do you know that virtually every country in the world has a border crisis right now? Every country. Not just the United States, not just the southern border. This is not a United States thing. Canada has a border crisis. They've declared it. Quebec's got a border crisis. I was over in France and Germany last year. They both have border crises. People are worried about it. They have heads in their hands, fretting about the border crisis. Sweden had a mass protest about a border crisis. Now, Norway and Finland have border crises. The whole world has a border crisis at once. Now, 99% of the people I know who are really, really worried about the border crisis as an existential threat to the United States are on the right. How can that be if there's really a border crisis? How can the climate crisis be all the way on the left and the border crisis be all on the right? How can that be? And how can it be worldwide? I think it's so interesting. These are some of the most interesting sociological phenomena, but I think it's wrapped up in this biopharmaceutical complex and the motivations, this infectious disease that's spreading from mind to mind to mind. It is really, this is the time to be a sociologist and just watch this play out. Yeah. It's just extraordinary. Now, it was nearly memorialized in the WHO International Health Regulations and Pandemic Treaty Alliance. It's nearly memorialized. Now, fortunately, some countries, there was enough resistance, they didn't get this thing inked. But if they did, this would have said, listen, the WHO has dominion over all plants, animals, and humans in the world, period. WHO says, shut down your farm. You go do it. WHO says, your nice little ranch here in Austin, too many trees, chop them down. WHO says, listen, new pandemic, you got to take it in the arm every 6 months. You got to do it. You got to shut down your business. Can you imagine an organization that's unelected having that much power and authority over individual nations? The individual nations would actually give up their sovereignty to this.
This is why it's the perfect time to be free, to actually do the work to be truly free.
Yes, to really be free.
To actually be free.
Yeah.
And it starts with the physical.
Yes.
Which is why your protocol, which by the way is on the screen right now, is so powerful. Like you've done such an incredible job of telling so many stories that I literally had heard of but never actually understood. The interconnectedness of which you speak is so profound. It's taken so much of your resources and energy. It's like, how do you even have time to meet with patients anymore? Or I'm sure you still do.
I had patients all day yesterday.
Okay, great. But you manage these two worlds of caring for patients and also going deep into the just absolute insanity of this web, of this syndicate. How do you hold those two worlds? Like, how do you hold all of it without your health deteriorating, without your relationships deteriorating? Because you deserve to be free as well, right? And all the ways that you're educating us about how we can be free through new knowledge, because knowledge is power if you're conscious enough to make new decisions. But how do you actually maintain your own freedom?
I'm as free as you are. And I think freedom actually starts up here.
Amen.
And I'll never forget, years ago, I had a chance to have dinner with Larry King. I was in a group of doctors.
There he is.
There is Larry. Yeah, he was. So, and we had a chance to ask him questions. And there was a woman in our group, and she wanted to ask him about all his marriages and stuff. But I asked him, I said, what gave you the courage to interview any world leader? He sat down with Brezhnev. He sat down with U.S. presidents, and he never seemed fazed. He never did. And he said, Peter, he said, you know what? He said, since I was a kid, I was always the most confident person in the world. He goes, I'm confident. I was born confident. I'm just a confident person. And when I look back at my life, I'm the same. I am a very confident person. Very confident. Some people interpret that as being cocky. Well, that's arrogant or cocky. Let me tell you what, you get on an airplane and you're in a storm. Do you want a confident pilot? Or do you want a pilot that says, well, I'm just kind of average. Maybe I can get us out of the storm.
No doubt.
Maybe I'm not too good in this circumstance. You're going to have a surgeon operate on your brain. Do you want the most confident neurosurgeon in the world at that time? So doctors, pilots, military people in these positions, we're edge players. By definition, we're edge players. And there's a great span of competency. To me, it's not surprising that only a tiny fraction of doctors have the blend of confidence, aptitude, courage, perseverance, and mental strength to lead this battle against a $1 trillion biopharmaceutical complex. They would love to squash you and squash me right now. They would love to not have a single word of this get out to get to any mind who would listen to it. There's going to be people that listen to this. They've never heard this before. Mm-hmm. It's not an echo chamber. We don't think, oh, it's an echo chamber. Everyone has heard this before.
It might be an echo chamber for my circles, but not for the world.
Not for the world. I'll never forget. I was my second time I testified in the U.S. Senate. And there was a press briefing. And I was called outside the hotel. It was kind of drizzling. It was cold. And I had to get out. And the press was there. There's all these microphones. And I answered questions. And after it was done, I wanted to get out of the rain. So I went back under the awning at the hotel. And I was waiting for some other people to come down. There was a young African-American woman there right by the doors opening. She had come out to kind of listen. And she said, "Are you a senator?" I said, "No, I'm just a doctor here to testify." She goes, "Well, what were you talking about?" I said, "I'm very concerned that people who are taking it in the arm, they're dying of cardiac arrests and blood clots. They're having all these complications." And she goes, "I took 2 of them." And it dawned on me, she had never heard about any of these side effects.
Yeah.
Isn't that stunning? So there are people today, it's not their fault. She's busy doing something else. Maybe she works in the kitchen or in housekeeping, or it's not her job to stay informed on this. she had never heard that they can cause a cardiac arrest. She had never heard that they could cause a blood clot or nerve problems. So one of the most effective people I know is a pediatric dentist. And she's fun and cute, and she's well known because she can do all these dental surgeries without anesthesia in kids. She somehow lulls them into accepting this, and she's famous in her field. And she's so disturbed about what she's seen through the pandemic, particularly this second half since 2021, since they rolled out. She said, Dr. McCullough, I'm not like you. I can't get on Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson or get on a stage in front of thousands of people. She said, but I'm pretty good with people. And each child she works on in the dentist chair, she tells them, listen, these aren't safe. And I want you to know, you shouldn't take them in the arm. They're not safe, particularly the ones for the pandemic virus. They're not. And then the parents come in and say, I want to talk to you. These are not safe. People are dying with these. And I want you to know this. She tells and she goes, if they leave my practice, so be it. But she doesn't stop there. She'll get a coffee in Starbucks. She'll go, hey, I'm Jenny. Did you take one of them? Did you take them? I just want to let you know they're not safe. We found out they're not safe, just so you know. And she gets in an Uber car. Hey, listen, she starts this nice conversation. She'll go to a restaurant, and then she goes to every table. She finds a reason to go to the restroom, and then she goes to every table. So I just want to introduce myself. I want to let you know they're not safe. I just couldn't live with my conscience if you went along thinking that. Wow. And she just does it in such a nice way. She said, listen, every single person I come in contact, I have to impart this important message since everyone's been asked to take them. It turns out in the United States, 75% of people took one of these. 75%. Can you imagine getting 75% of people to do anything in this country?
Let's get 75% of people to exercise and eat whole foods. Can you imagine if we turn the tide?
I know.
The syndicate, the financial resources and the energy that they pull from, if we could just take that and place it into a narrative of eat whole foods, exercise, literally we would have the entire society and world that we've always dreamed about, that we know is possible. Yet here we are playing out in the theater. And I think the only way is really to take care of the physical body first, because if the physical body is compromised, then the mind will follow and the emotional body will follow. This is why, and it's in the screen right now, it's in our show notes today, this protocol that you developed. We actually had someone, which I've never done before. We're going to actually play a clip from an audience member, Catherine. And Catherine asked you this specific question here. And it's about, she took the inoculation and she'd like to actually take care of herself and her family. So let's just listen to what Catherine has to say.
Hi, yes, I'm wondering if there is any way to reverse vaccine damage, even if it's unseen damage. Is there any way to reverse that?
What we're dealing with right now are people that are in that 75% that want to care for themselves because they've learned new knowledge, they've grown wiser, they've opened their heart and mind to something new, which you're sharing. There's got to be, and you've developed this over the course of, I think, 5 years now, almost 5 years. This protocol is very inherently natural, but the dosage and the synergy is interesting. Yeah. And so it's on the screen right now. The name of this is the Ultimate Detox Bundle. And in this bundle, there's some nattokinase, some bromelain, and some turmeric, which at first glance, you'd be like, well, how is that going to help me take care of protein? But there's deep science on this, and you wouldn't put your name on it and your reputation unless it was actually showing results. So let's go into this, because there's been so much painting of the picture of the syndicate, and it's been absolutely exploding my mind the whole time. The research and the world that you've played in. But how did you come across this synergy in the compound itself? And because this is the bright side, I think this is actually the silver lining of the theater and the insanity we've been through, is that we actually can care for ourselves. We can care for our health. And when your health is cared for, when your body is cared for, you are less monetizable. You are less susceptible to the weaponization of the syndicate, of the narrative. But it starts with the body.
You're no longer vulnerable. Vulnerability is very important. If you feel vulnerable, then everything follows. If you feel strong, resilient, invincible, then it's a totally different mindset. Isn't it interesting that everything we know about the organism that we've described so far, the nucleocapsid, the envelope protein, the protein on the surface, the S protein, it's all synthetic. It was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Think about this. A very unnatural thing got us all sick. It's unnatural. It was not supposed to happen. Now, and I'm a drug prescribing doctor. That's what I do. I prescribe prescription drugs, and I do clinical trials with prescription drugs. And that's the world I live in. And working on this for years, there was not a single prescription drug that seemed to answer her question of how do I take care of this problem now that I've taken it in the body. It's so interesting that virtually everything we used in the acute infection was from a natural source, and that everything we're using now in the process called detoxification is from a natural source. So let's take the acute infection. From the very beginning, a virus goes in the nose and mouth. We actually, in the end, used that saline, salt water, is partially effective against that in early ways of the infection. Iodine, which is natural, is very effective against it. Xylitol, which is a natural sugar from corn cob and plants, that's very effective. So nasal sprays and gargles were effective. In the first line of treating the illness, aspirin is derived from the bark of birch trees. HCQ is derived from the cinchona bark. IVM is derived from the soil in Japan, used to treat river blindness and other illnesses. Isn't that just the most amazing observation? We used corticosteroids, which are derived from animals' adrenal glands originally. We used heparins, forms of blood thinners that come from the intestines of cows and the lungs of pigs. That everything we used to treat the infection that was effective was natural. Now in detoxification, we learned that both the virus and the injectable products, they leave large quantities of the Wuhan protein in our body. This protein is about, it's probably about 3,400 amino acids in its code, 1,200 or 3,400 base pairs, 1,200 amino acids in its length, glycosylated side chains. The protein is not assailable by human enzymes. So once this protein is in your body, you take it in the arm, the genetic code tells the body to produce a protein, it builds up in your body, and you can't stop it. Experts, molecular biology experts, Kevin McKernan, others have said, listen, the genetic code that you take in the arm, that probably is dissolved by human enzymes that can actually slice up the code. We don't know how long it takes, but the code has been found circulating in blood for a month. Maybe it's longer. That's worrisome right there. But the human body has got to get rid of that stuff. But the protein, this Wuhan protein, and
this is the protein.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. That's the forbidden word. This Wuhan protein damages organs. It's been found in every organ in the body, causes blood clots, may be carcinogenic. This thing's the most toxic protein I've ever seen in my career. Found in the brain at autopsy, found in the heart causing inflammation, found in the eyes, the skin, everywhere. And we can't get rid of it. So the brilliance was early on the Japanese, Dr. Tanakawa gets great credit for this. They were trying to find a way to prevent the infection. They said, listen, we're going to have to strip off this surface protein. We got to find something that's going to break it down. And they found nattokinase. Now, the Japanese have been eating natto, which is partially fermented soybeans, for breakfast forever because it has cardiovascular benefits for over 1,000 years. There's papers written on this.
It's an acquired taste.
I've had it myself. It's not too bad.
It's not bad. It's just acquired, yeah.
It's acquired. It fills you up. You eat some natto. Boy, you're ready for the day. But it has a natural enzyme in it called nattokinase. Nattokinase is a thrombolytic. It breaks up micro blood clots, okay? They use it to actually try to reduce plaque in the carotid arteries and the coronary arteries. It's anti-atherosclerotic, lowers cholesterol a little bit, lowers blood sugar a little bit. But uniquely, when it comes to the Wuhan protein, this foreign protein that's in our body, it slices it up. In fact, they did experiments where if you take the virus that has the projections all over it, and you put it around nattokinase, it just strips it off. It makes it a useless ball. So they rendered the virus, basically neutered it by dissolving the spike protein. It was that good They used it in cell lysate models and in intact cell models. And this product, you take it orally, it gets partially absorbed into the bloodstream, and then it will get partially distributed to tissues, but it doesn't harm cells. So what a brilliant discovery. So Japan scores big on nattokinase. So nattokinase is the first thing we included in the protocol. Then we said, listen, this is like any other protocol development in the setting of emergency, we need redundancy. We're not going to rely on one thing. Just like with acute treatment, I didn't say, oh, here, just take this one magic pill. No, it's 4 to 6 drugs in combination. This is a difficult syndrome. The post-infection long C syndromes and the post-inoculation syndromes are long-term problems, multiple drugs. But the key is the protein. If we just treat the symptoms or treat inflammation, people don't get better. This protein is stuck in the human body. We measure, in my clinic, we measure antibodies to protein. They're sky high years after taking it in the arm. People must be producing a ton of this for years. The second thing was bromelain. Bromelain is a family of enzymes derived from the stems of pineapples. Multiple studies show in different places, it slices up the Wuhan protein. Wonderful, that's on base. Even the fragments can cause inflammation and cause symptoms. And there, the Indians get great credit. They've done a lot of research with curcumin, which is derived from turmeric. And curcumin is a natural anti-inflammatory. It's been used for ages for arthritis. And there are prospective, randomized, double-blind trials in people in these post-acute sequelae syndromes. And they feel better and measures of inflammation drop. So curcumin's in. So those three, nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin, became the first base detoxification McCullough protocol. Now, both the early treatment and the detoxification were copyrighted in my name for only one reason, so people can locate them. I have no financial interest in these. I don't have any patents or royalty streams.
Well, this is why pharma can't patent them, because they're just derived from nature. They're
derived from nature, and they're just the protocol is copyrighted, and it's copyrighted internationally too. And boy, has it been worthwhile to do that, because the fact that people need to look at it. So when say people say McCullough protocol, they know me, so that takes. I didn't call it the Dallas protocol or I used my name. And that's symbolic for an important reason. I stand behind it. I'm responsible for it. And I'm responsible for the outcomes or the lack of outcomes that people have and the side effects they have when they do it. It's very important. We even had anybody in the industry of the injectable products in the arm say, listen, I'm responsible. I'm standing behind this. No one. There's been nobody in the mask industry say, listen, I'm responsible for the masks. I said they were going to work. No one. There's been no one in the hand sanitizer business, no one in the lockdown business saying, I'm responsible. No one. So this is the ultimate put up or shut up. I scientifically conceived this. I copyrighted it, and I was the first to publish it and memorialize it in the history of medicine, both for acute treatment and follow-up. There's a lot of other people talking, but I'm the one doing. And what we did is, listen, we're going with this. This is a base. We started with conservative doses. Now we've learned to double or even quadruple the doses. So the starting doses were natto, 2,000 fibrinolytic units twice a day, curcumin, 500 milligrams twice a day, and bromelain, 500 milligrams a day. We've now, and that became the Ultimate Spike Detox Wellness Company. Now I am the chief scientific officer of the wellness company, so I advise them on this. This became the most widely used trio called the Ultimate Spike Detox. We're soon going to release extra strength detox, which is doubling the doses of all of them. Jordan Vaughn, who's an internist in Birmingham, he runs the largest blood clot center in the country now. People took it in the arm. They got huge blood clots. They go see Jordan in Birmingham. Jordan just testified in Congress. He's a terrific internist. Jordan's using 16,000 units of natto plus prescription blood thinners to dissolve these blood clots. And I've seen loads of these blood clots in my Dallas office. And let me tell you, they don't dissolve with blood thinners like Eliquis or Pradaxa or Xarelto or Coumadin. They actually need the enzymes, the detoxification enzymes, the nattokinase and bromelain to dissolve these guys. And it can take a year or more. So I put this out there as a proposal, an empiric proposal, after observing hundreds and hundreds of patients in my clinic and talking to other doctors because we don't have funding for large prospective double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials. Now, if we had the funding, we could do the research and it would take about 5 to 20 years. They always do. I've led large randomized trials myself. I've published in the best journals. I know the randomized trials work. They're wonderful instruments, but they take time. We don't have 5 to 20 years for people suffering with all these problems right now. On top of that, the Biden administration and HHS, they spent $1 billion on this problem, particularly the sequelae after the infection, and they've come up with 0 protocols, nothing. There is no government protocol. So we're right back to like the acute infection. When I told Tucker Carlson there's no Harvard protocol, he was blown away. I said, yeah, our flagship institutions don't know how to treat anything regarding this early infection, and they don't know how to do anything with respect to treating the complications after people taking it. Mayo Clinic doesn't have a protocol. They don't even measure anything related to the key protein that's causing the problem. They're lost. There is a collective, complete oblivion, a lassitude on what's going on, and people are acutely ill. So I said, listen, I'm going to go out here. I'm going to directly observe. I'm going to modify. One of the first modifications is if there's any subclinical or clinical myocarditis or chest inflammation, colchicine. It's a prescription drug. It was used extensively during the acute illness. There's now a network meta-analysis of 39 separate analyses showing there was a mortality reduction in the acute illness. Like when I had it, I took this product. It's a prescription drug we use for gout. It's a specific anti-inflammatory. It's derived from the petals of a purple flower, but it's a prescription drug. So it's a natural product. So colchicine, I am prescribing large amounts of colchicine, large amounts, because there's a great concern that the next person could have a cardiac arrest. And there's even been publications where people have iatrogenic myocarditis, they get put on colchicine, they get better, they go off colchicine, the myocarditis comes back, they go back on colchicine. In one of these papers from Germany, they actually even gave a 3rd dose in the arm of the product that caused the problem, and the patient survived it. So colchicine is a magic drug. I think colchicine plus the detoxification could be the answer to saving a lot of lives, and I'm prescribing a ton of it. Another addition, this is very interesting, is it turns out that in some of these syndromes, the virus from multiple infections is still in the body replicating. And there was an autopsy study from Chertow and colleagues from the NIH taking skin biopsies and eye biopsies, and the virus is there in people who have died 9 months later. They have the virus. Is
this what exacerbates the shedding? Is this what adds to shedding?
It could be, or it could be the fact that people just feel chronically sick afterwards. They call it long C. That's what they call it. Anyhow, I have found that when there's cranial nerve abnormalities, trigeminal neuralgia, Bell's palsy, cutaneous, sometimes there's rashes that just don't go away. The Chertow data suggested the virus is alive and in the skin months later. So there we use IVM, that important drug that's derived from the soil in Japan. And I use it for 90 days for that. If there are signs of autoimmunity where the body has turned an immune system attack against it, so everybody with one of these conditions, like she said, what are you going to do about it? She would come in, she would get an exam, she'd get laboratories. Among the laboratories, she would get an autoimmune screen. I measure the anti-neutrophil antibody, the ANA, the rheumatoid factor, and the anti-citrulated peptide. If there's any skin or kidney involvement, I order a more expensive test called the anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic antibody. If the autoimmune tests turn out positive, and they do, in fact, I have one that just turned positive today. I need to talk to her on the way home. We prescribe HCQ because it's used for autoimmune syndromes before the pandemic anyway. So we're back to our old drugs. The last add-on, which I think is evidence-based now, which you're going to find this very interesting. Do you know who breezed through COVID, who never had any problems and don't have any of these long syndromes? What group? Smokers.
Oh, nicotine.
Yes.
Nicotine.
Smokers breeze through this. You'd think they were going to go down like a rock. Nicotine actually blocks the Wuhan protein. So nicotine is protective. So with a smoker, I would prescribe like a nicotine patch at 21 milligrams a day to detox them off the cigarettes. But in a non-smoker, giving nicotine, you worry about addiction or worry about causing nausea. So we're just using 7 milligrams a day. It's the most widely used product. You can buy it over the counter.
Lozenge?
No, patch.
Patch.
So on Amazon, you can buy a Habitrol patch for like, $10 or $20.
Yes.
And just put one on a day, and we do that for 30 days or 90 days. It's amazing how people develop, the mental clarity comes back, numbness and tingling go away. A lot of the features of the syndrome go away with a nicotine patch. People can do that on their own. So they can go to a wellness company and get the ultimate spike detox. They can do that on their own. And again, the caveats are bleeding. So I want people to understand that, if there's a bleeding disorder or risk for bleeding, this is not just a free-for-all. And nicotine patch is freely available, over the counter. And then prescription colchicine, see a doctor. We could actually start to do exactly what she's asking, is to alleviate the symptoms and begin to mitigate risks. So what have I observed in my clinical practice? It takes about 12 months. The turning point's about 9 months. Ringing in the ears, post-exertional malaise, numbness and tingling, what's called small fiber neuropathy, even some of the high amplitude tremors at about 9 months will go away. This vague chest pain that people get, probably subclinical myocarditis, called pleurodynia or atypical chest pain, pericarditis, myocarditis. Now, we use some more serious drugs when we get there. Also, the symptoms abate. Blood clots start to dissolve after about 9 to 12 months. Finally, blood clots could have been there for a couple of years, huge ones, bigger than we've ever seen before. And I think the most interesting thing is we've tackled some of the most difficult syndromes, which are the severe neurologic syndromes. Now, they are Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a paralytic syndrome that can involve even rectal sphincter tone, even involve respiration, and then transverse myelitis, which is actually like a severing of the spinal cord. And there, we've carefully observed patients improving. Of course, we need to do the best we can to try to write all this up. And the headwinds on publications, anytime we have a breakthrough, it is so difficult to publish. It could take 2 years to publish a miraculous case like this because of the suppression. There is a complete suppression on anything that can offer people hope, which is the most interesting thing. So you think, listen, people took it in the arm. The bad guys got what they wanted. People took it. Now we're just trying to dig ourselves out of this. Why can't we publish something that's hopeful? Even that is suppressed. We're seeing this all over, treatment of these injuries. My estimate is we're at about 4,000 papers describing the injuries, disabilities, and deaths after taking it and potential solutions. My estimate is only 1% of the papers are getting in. I think there's 400,000 papers. I know because I have some of them. They just cannot get published that are out there because the information is being blocked to the world.
Which makes me wonder what else is on the horizon. And even, is that a healthy path for me to take? I think no, I don't think it's good for us to live in fear. But yet, even if there is more practices for the WHO or Bill Gates, I think Bill Gates recently last year was like, well, there's another one coming.
How does he know?
That. Right, exactly, right? So how do you know? And if you do know, are you giving us all a premonition of what's to come? But yet, that to me is a dead end cul-de-sac because that just promotes more fear. I think what's more advantageous and more empowering is actually taking care of our physical body, learning how to cook food, learning how to move, learning how to breathe properly, learning how to be a human that God designed, that our Creator designed for us to be, which is so powerful. And I love that basically it's plants and soil that are in this detox bundle. It's so wonderful. It's like coming from the earth, which we live with and we live on.
Well, let's talk about diet for a second. There's a paper from Poland, and I can't recall the first author. I don't think I could pronounce your name, but it was a very good diet. Those with healthier diets had less infection. They had less risk of getting the infection and had milder courses. Okay. Thinner people did better than heavier people, for sure.
But can't you say the same for surgeries and all medical conditions? For
sure. And then this is very interesting. Every single study showed that eating sugar and starch worsened things. even during the acute infection. It got to the point where we tell people, listen, you're sick with the virus. Don't go out and eat a Cinnabon. And you actually will medically get worse.
Did you tell them to eat low carb or more carnivore?
We said high quality sources of protein, fresh fruits and vegetables. This was very important. So so that literature congealed. There was an entire literature that supported our sense that immune boosting or nutraceuticals and supplements could play a real role. And as a medical doctor, a prescribing doctor, I was always a little bit skeptical, right? But there are sources of data for sure showing that zinc played a role, that it was an RNA-dependent polymerase inhibitor, and that it needed an ionophore to bring it in, like HCQ, but zinc played a role. There was somewhat supportive data for vitamin C, but boy, it better be high dose, not a trickle.
50,000, 60,000?
Yeah, it's got to be way up there. 3,000, if you're going to take oral, like 3,000 liposomal 4 or 5 times a day. You really got to crank it up there. You got to, tens of grams of vitamin C. The most interesting of all these was vitamin D. Oh my Lord. Every single study on vitamin D was positive. We learned vitamin D was preventive. So those on vitamin D had lesser frequency of the illness and it was less severe. It could actually be acutely therapeutic, which was very interesting. There's been papers written on this, but the doses had to be higher. So where I am right now is just for general health prevention. I'm at 10,000 units of vitamin D a day, way higher than olden days. In acute treatment in McCullough protocol, it was 20,000 a day. And someone said, listen, it probably ought to be 50,000 a day for a period of time. And treatment protocols that I've written, 5 days on the short end, 30 days on the long end. And you get 30 days at 20,000 units of vitamin D, probably no risk of kidney stones or other problems. But if you do it forever and ever, maybe there's a problem. Quercetin, which is a polyphenol supplement, supportive data there. It was so interesting. And we could go on and on. There are data for spirulina as an example, which is a blue-green algae, a natural herb worm root, artemisian, which actually is similar to an IVM type of approach. So doctors in Asia weren't using IVM, they were using artemisian. So as I talked to more and more doctors around the world, I realized no single drug was necessary nor sufficient. And there were many ways to help people get the illness, many ways to help people get through this recovery phase. But the principle was get rid of this spike protein or block it the best you can until the body can get rid of it. And what I've likened this to is when you get the infection or take it in the arm, it's similar to getting Lyme, where the Borrelia burgdorferi organism, it just doesn't get out of the body. You just can't get rid of it. That's the reason why some people have a post-Lyme syndrome. It's similar to syphilis. Once the syphilis, the spirochete gets in the body can't get rid of it. That's the reason why there's neurologic and aortopathy and other manifestations of syphilis. There are some bugs that get in the body we have a hard time getting rid of. This Wuhan bug is one of them. And that's the reason why we need detoxification. We need to be patient with it because it takes a long time. With the Ultimate Spike Detox for Wellness Company offers, and you'll find lots of similar on the internet, and it's all, because it works, is take it on an empty stomach. Now, people say, well, how can you say it worked? People say, well, you're pushing these things. Well, listen, they're widely available, very affordable, no matter where you want to get them. And if I was wrong on this, we've been at this now for 2 years. The internet would be loaded with, this doesn't work. Dr. McCullough, you're wrong. I did this forever and ever, and I'm just as bad. My blood clot never went away. I would have been nailed with a litany. You know how people are on social media.
Sure.
And in my clinic. But you go on social media and you type this in, thank God I'm better. It took months, but I'm better. The numbness and tingling is gone. Thank God the blood clot's finally gone. Thank God I'm walking again. And it's just, yes, it is nothing but a sea of compliments. And in the absence of a large randomized trial and $500 million, I have no other way as a scientist to evaluate this outside of empiricism and then carefully listen to responses.
It's inspiring because there is hope. So many people are like, how do I even get rid of this? And they just don't know what they don't know. It's unconscious incompetence. So they're just not aware. Thank you for bringing hope. I mean, it's definitely like needed and more now than ever, because there's so many factors that I think bring pain and fear and we live in this world of social media where people go to get quick fixes, and it's almost like people want a shortcut to living real. And I think the only way we can really live real is to return to our roots. And that's why I think it's so beautiful that in the actual healing protocol itself, there are roots connected to the earth. I just love that.
God wants us to have hope. God wants us to be joyous, to look up and be joyous. Satan wants no hope. Joy to Satan is like kryptonite. When I testified in the U.S. Senate the first time, I'll never forget, November 19th, 2020, the majority chairman is Ron Johnson. Minority chairman is Gary Peters from Michigan. Johnson, handsome, silver hair, no mask. We're in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. Gives his opening remarks. I'm the lead witness, so I'm first up. Gary Peters is wearing a black mask, and you can hear him speaking beneath the masks. And this is before, listen, I am bringing America and the world the message that we can treat this illness. There's no bigger message in 2020 than this. Gary Peters says, what you're about to hear is misinformation. This is how he prefaced my testimony, my Senate testimony, coming from an expert who's the only person published on this from a U.S. senator who's not an expert. And he's wearing a black mask. He says, what you're about to hear is misinformation. And I don't want anybody in America to have hope. He meant to say false hope. And it was the biggest Freudian slip ever.
Wow.
And if you ever wanted to visualize a characterization of evil, think about a man in a position of power when the country is on its knees due to this infection, speaking through a black mask and telling people he didn't want them to have hope. Hope is very important. Hope is what carries people through at the lowest times. When people hit the panic button and they cash it in the setting of the acute infection, and they hit the panic button and called 911, a sequence of events happened, and we had 1.2 million Americans die in that sequence event, and virtually every death was in the hospital. People didn't die at home. It's the most interesting observation. If they just would have stayed at home, I wonder how many really would have survived.
This is the war on the mind, and this is why this conversation is so life-changing, because it doesn't have to be a war. We can just recognize that we don't need to participate in the war, which has been eloquently stated. Thank you for being here. This has been incredible. And y'all share this with somebody who has been struggling with this process of not even knowing there's a detoxification. It's on the screen right now. And I know it's not cheap to make, so thank you for the discount. It's 10% off. Use the code Josh, share it with your family and friends. And I'm going to go through this myself. I'm sure I had a couple times. I was hiking in Hawaii and I couldn't barely go up a little hill. Yeah. And I thought, this is probably COVID. It was January 2020. And so I think we've all been touched by this. I know we have been touched by this, either through illness or through knowing people that have passed. And, I say this with reverence and respect. This is happening for our good. It's not to take away from the lives that have been lost, but this is happening so that the grace of the Creator can come and teach us. This is a school for souls we're in, Dr. McCullough. And so we are being taught how to care for ourselves and care for other people. So thanks for being part of that narrative.
Thank you so much. Let me point out that we have the Wellness Company kits here. We have the Black Contagion Kit, which has HCQ, IVM, has oseltamivir, which will cover influenza and bird flu, as well as budesonide. So the Black Kit is the safety kit that a lot of people that I have patients with heart failure, emphysema, lung disease, say, Doc, I just can't go through this again. I need a backup. I need some security. I said, listen, get one of the Black kits, especially the elderly and frail. And then the Aqua Blue kit, this is the 2 out of the 4 kits that Wellness Company has prepared, is the broad medical kit. So there's a bladder infection, there's a cellulitis, a fungal infection, also covers the pandemic virus. Get the broadened blue kit. They'll get a discount through your promo. These are legally prescribed. They come with a user guide. They'll come with your name on the prescription bottles. The drugs last for years. And we should never be caught again where you're sick and a pharmacist said, no, I'm not going to fill the prescription. That led to countless lives lost. Wellness Company is the vanguard of this new patriot economy. Take care of yourself. Take matters into your own hands. People who are empowered with prescription medications ahead of time, let me tell you what, they do have hope. They do have self-efficacy, and they're well supported. You can get a doctor on the line. If you're confused about the medication, Wellness Company will help guide you through this. Listen, there could be another one of these coming. And if the doctors perform like they did last time, you're up a creek without a paddle. We need the Wellness Company as a national, international resource.
You know, it's interesting that the name of the company is the Wellness Company. This podcast is Wellness and Wisdom, right? And there's been some serious wisdom at this table. By the way, this is a peroda tree from Costa Rica.
So nice.
And peroda is the wisdom keeper of the forest, which I think is amazing. So in that same vein, what do you believe wellness actually is? I mean, look, you've been through so much. You hold these worlds of science and understanding the syndicate and working with patients and doing media and being a father. Like, there's a lot for you. Mm-hmm. So what have you learned? You know, what wisdom can you impart on us as we say goodbye that you believe wellness actually is? What is well-being to you? What is wellness to you? How do you define wellness?
Gosh, in the simplest terms, it's freedom from hospitalization and death. There's always two bad outcomes, hospitalization and death. You probably never think about it because you're young and you're fit and you're strong. But let me tell you, when you're 80 years old and things have accrued over time, you may think about it. And my mom's in a senior home. She's 86. Believe me, freedom from not being hospitalized and being alive, that's a base condition of wellness. Now, on top of that, boy, I'd love to be fit and strong like you and run marathons and half marathons and hike the mountains and what have you. And I do believe a big component of that is your physical attributes.
Yeah. For
people to be fit and strong. And I've lived that out. I've been a lifelong runner. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke dope. I don't have tattoos in my body. I mean, I really, really take care of the body like a temple. And I've run a marathon in every state in the United States. Tomorrow I'll work out for 2.5 hours. It's that important. On diet, I've recently been taught a lesson from God where I've developed real gluten intolerance. Thought I had it for a while, but I wasn't sure and never really delved into the carbs to the point of, having a giant pot belly. I've had times where my weight's been higher for sure. But I ate some tabbouleh. If you know what tabbouleh is, it's a parsley salad that has burgle in it, which is wheat germ. And my wife had made an extra amount of it, and I had it for 3 days in a row, and that was probably enough to kick it off. I actually developed dermatitis, herpetic dermatitis, which is basically like shingles, but it's due to the gluten sensitivity. And I just couldn't believe it. I said, I just can't believe I developed this rash. And it was all over. It came in patches. It's like shingles, but it's like all over your body.
Wow.
And it is true gluten sensitivity. So that taught me, you know what? These wheat antigens are out. So on the way down here, I didn't grab the thing that the granola bar, little cookie she handed out. Because it's just, I can't have this. So what I do is the diet that I followed is high quality sources of protein in this order: fish, beans, nuts, egg whites, non-fat dairy, occasional chicken and beef, occasional, and then fresh fruits and vegetables. What I try to eliminate now or don't have at all are the 3 S's: sugars, sweets and treats, starches, anything made out of flour, rice and potatoes, get rid of it, and then saturated fat. No gooey cheeses, no fast food, no burgers, fries, pizza, what have you. If one can do that, then my decades of practice say that is nirvana on diet. And people say, well, what is that? Is that the carnivore diet? Well, I said, well, in part it's a carnivore diet. Is it South Beach? I said, well, in part it is. Is it Atkins? In part. Is it Sugar Busters? Yeah, it's in part. So it's kind of the best of all of them. It's the best of all. Anybody who goes to an extreme, I think, is probably doing something that in the end will have some consequences.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
They're seeking homeostasis, and sometimes you have to feel what it's not pretty hard in order to find it.
So that's kind of my advice on diet. So diet, exercise, maintain your body weight. I'm within about 10% of my age 18 body weight. Are you there? Or are you above it?
Well, I was 280 pounds when I was 18, so I'm definitely
280. So you're below.
I was a big dude.
So you're below your.
I mean, I've had a really big journey with food. I look at food as fuel.
That's another podcast.
Some people live to eat.
Yeah.
I actually just eat so I can live well.
Okay.
So I'm half Sicilian.
But you're below your high school body weight?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, very few people are.
Absolutely.
I was
an offensive lineman. I mean, I was a big guy.
Well, there's an NIH study showing only 10% of people are within 10% of their high school body weight. I'm there, barely.
Hey.
Now, 90% of people are more than 10% above their high school body weight. So I graduated from high school at 140. The average person my age who graduated at 140 is now 180 or 200. That's average. So people are accruing these pounds over time. So, I think, you say, what's wellness? Man, if you can get within 10% of your weight at age 18, you can have a reasonable, healthy, balanced diet. Exercise, no alcohol. Alcohol is an interesting one. People are like, alcohol, and you got a French paradox, whatever. This has been analyzed and analyzed and analyzed and analyzed. And the net analysis is you'd be best to have no alcohol.
Sure.
Blood pressure is lower, less risk of atrial fibrillation, less risk of the alcohol-related cancers and liver disease. And then probably the best thing for wellness, sleep. Most people don't know this. One drink a month destroys your sleep architecture. Sleep architecture is a delicate dream weave of REM and non-REM sleep. One drink, go ahead and try it. It destroys that sleep architecture. The next day, you don't feel so well rested. The stress hormones are up. That destroys the next several days of the sleep architecture. It's a vicious cycle. So I always have my patients say, listen, doctor, I got atrial fibrillation. I got high blood pressure. I'm not sleeping well. I said, why don't you do a 28-day alcohol challenge, not a drop, and tell me how you're sleeping afterwards. Every time people say, that's it, I'm finally sleeping.
Well, maybe you get to prescribe them some kava, because kava gives very similar benefits of alcohol without the alcohol deleterious ones.
Wow, don't know about it.
Kava is incredible. The kava root, check it out. Definitely something that y'all get to. If you have a trouble with drinking, try the kava. Dr. McCullough, what an incredible conversation. We took a lot of tours down roads that we've never been before. And I just wonder now, like if you had one phrase, I know it's hard to do to encapsulate everything you shared, but if there was one phrase that you'd love to just leave people with, a signature, an energetic signature, a verbal signature that you could leave them with, where it would inspire them that this conversation is worth sharing. What might that be? Well,
let's finish the last thing on wellness. I would say, listen, to encapsulate, I think there's a holy trinity. The holy trinity in wellness is diet, physical fitness, and sleep. If you can actually, in those domains, give yourself A+ on those three domains, I think you have it. And when you have wellness, then you are so well positioned to go out there and seek the truth. Seek the truth. Listen to learn. Seek the truth and be able to discern it through really now a fog of confused messaging and fear and false narratives. Yeah. To seek the truth, find it, and hold it, and then be bold and relentless in your approach to help others. And that's what I do. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, y'all. Until we see you again, we're both wishing you love and wellness. We'll talk with you soon.